Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Georgina and this is Art History Girl. Thanks so much for your patience. I've been away for a few weeks at my parents' house. It was amazing. I had lots of dog cuddles, cake, and it was really hot weather. Today it's the second video in our Women Artists series and we're looking at Augusta Savage, who was a sculptor. You're going to be absolutely blown away by this amazing, inspirational woman. And thanks to everyone who voted for her in the polls on Twitter and Instagram. You're right, it's absolutely essential to tell her story. She was the first African-American woman to open her own art gallery in the US, and she came up against huge adversity. Most of her work has been destroyed, only 12 pieces are left, and she faced a lot of racism and poverty in her lifetime. Savage also taught lots of amazing 20th century artists in the 1930s, and she paved the way for future generations of Black American artists. Savage was beaten by her father for making art. Her art career started when, as a child, she began making small animals out of red clay. Her father, who was a strict Methodist minister, was strongly against his daughter's interest in art. She once said, "My father licked me 4 or 5 times a week. He nearly whipped all the art out of me." And that was because he thought her sculptures were sinful. They were like creating false idols to worship, and in the Bible it warns against worshipping graven images. She remembered her early love of art, saying, "From the time I can first recall the rain falling on the red clay in Florida, I wanted to make things. When my brothers and sisters were making mud pies, I would be making ducks and chickens with the mud." None of her works from childhood still exist, but this terracotta portrait of a baby is probably reminiscent of the small red clay sculptures she would have made. The family moved from Green Cove Springs to West Palm Beach in Florida in 1915. She managed to persuade a local pottery, Chase Potteries, to give her a bucket of clay and modelled a Virgin Mary for her strict father. It shut him up and allowed her to keep making her sculptures in peace. She also persuaded her school board to let her teach modelling during her senior year, with a salary of $1 a day. By this point, Savage could make all sorts of farm animals, so she modelled lots of different animals and entered the West Palm Beach County Fair. She won and was awarded $25 in prize money and a ribbon of honour. A few years after that, in 1921, Savage was accepted into an art college course to study at the Cooper Union School of Art in New York. She organised a job there as an apartment caretaker and moved to the city with just $4.60 in her pocket. She beat 142 men to get into college. Savage had wanted to learn at the School of American Sculpture with Solon Borglum, but she couldn't because she was extremely poor and couldn't afford the tuition. Her only option was to go to a scholarship-based school, so Borglum wrote her a letter of recommendation, and that, along with a bust of a Harlem minister that she'd made overnight, sent her to the top of the waiting list for the Cooper Institute. She was the only woman to apply and the only Black woman at that. This was in 1921, when America was still extremely segregated with different bathrooms and shops for Black and white people. Racism was part of everyday life. So for Savage to beat 142 men, it really was a remarkable achievement. Savage faced racism. She won a scholarship to study at the summer school at the Fontainebleau School of Fine Art in France in 1923. But the French government retracted their offer after finding out she was Black. Apparently 2 Alabama winners of the scholarship had refused to travel or share a room with a Black woman. Savage was understandably really upset about this, and she questioned the committee, which was the start of her becoming a campaigner for equal rights for the rest of her life. She wrote an open letter to the New York World paper, writing, "How am I to compete with other American artists if I'm not given the same opportunity?" And she didn't leave matters there. She also appealed to the Ethical Culture Society, which wrote to the committee on her behalf. It caused a media storm both sides of the Atlantic, but the ban was upheld. One upside, though, was that one of the committee members who supported her was the sculptor Herman McNeil, who was then the president of the National Sculpture Society. He invited Savage to study privately with him that summer in his studio on Long Island, although obviously it was not good enough that she wasn't accepted by that college course. During the mid-1920s, Savage received her first big commission. It was the bust of the civil rights activist and writer W.E.B. Du Bois for the Harlem Library. She seems to have got this commission because she spent all of her time working at the library, so she had probably made some good contacts. And the friends of the library could see her determination to succeed. She worked carefully on the bust, trying to show the personality and intelligence of the man himself. The work drew lots of admiration and several other orders came her way. One of them was a commission for the bust of Marcus Garvey, who was an American black nationalist. Savage was one of the first artists who consistently depicted black physiognomy. Her best-known work during the 1920s was Gamin, an informal bust portrait of her nephew Ellis Ford. The French word gamin means street urchin, and the figure's wrinkled shirt and cap really show his poverty. The child's expression appears much wiser than his years, which again suggests that he's seen a lot of hardship in his short life. Savage might even be showing a bit of herself here, seeing as she'd also suffered plenty of difficulties by the time she was in her 30s. Money was thin on the ground, but Gamin actually won her the Julius Rosenwald Scholarship to study in Paris in 1929, so she did finally get to go to Paris. Savage coloured her art with boot polish. Savage was so poor before she went to Paris that she had to be thrifty. Bronze was too expensive, so instead she made her sculpture with white plaster covered in brown paint mixed with shoe polish. This pair of dancing figures were made in this way, they're just painted plaster figures. Savage set up an art school. She returned to America in the early 1930s, but found the country devastated by the Wall Street crash and then the Great Depression. Although there wasn't a huge market for commissions, the Harlem Renaissance was in full swing. Black people, from unskilled labourers to the educated middle classes, shared a common experience of racial oppression, and they were trying to create a new identity as free, creative people. Black artists from all over the country flocked to Harlem, making it a really creative and buzzy place to be. Savage opened the Savage Studio of Arts and Crafts in Harlem in 1932. It was set in a basement in Harlem, and 1,500 students passed through the door. The school taught painting, drawing and sculpture classes to budding black artists. And the African-American painter Jacob Lawrence was one of the many pupils who became extremely successful later on. Savage also became the first African-American woman to open her own art gallery in America in 1939. The opening night was really well attended, with 500 people turning up. At the reception, Savage said, "We do not ask any special favours as artists because of our race. We only want to present to you our works and ask you to judge them on their merits." Her sculpture Realization was made around this time and would have very likely have been displayed when she first opened her gallery. It shows a black couple crouched in oppression. What is being realised in this piece is slavery. It's about the traumatic psychological experience of being enslaved. The way the woman is sitting makes it seem like she's incredibly vulnerable. She's covering herself with her arms, and it makes it look like her clothing has been stripped away. She's humiliated and trying to protect herself. The male figure by her side is cowering and looks childlike in the way he's leaning towards the woman, seeking comfort. Savage strongly campaigned for civil rights, as we know, so this sculpture is no doubt a comment on the terrible racism and working conditions black people still faced in the 1930s, despite slavery technically having been abolished in America 70 years earlier. Savage made a 16-foot sculpture. The height of her career came when she was asked to create a large sculpture for New York's World Fair in 1939. World Fairs, or Universal Expositions, were large international exhibitions designed to showcase achievements of nations. These exhibitions began in the 19th century in France, and then they were held in different parts of the world for anywhere between 3 to 6 months. The New York version had a futuristic theme and was meant to show visitors a look at the world of tomorrow. Savage was the only black woman, bit of a theme, who exhibited at the World Fair, and there were only 4 women overall. It took her 2 years to develop and create the 16-foot sculpture, and she took a period of leave from her position at the Harlem Community Art Center, where she was working as a director. Savage created a work for the exhibition called the Harp, and it features 12 black singers rising up from the palm of God, which was made into the shape of a harp, and was considered one of the main attractions at the fair. The sculpture symbolised the musical contributions of African-Americans through black spirituals and hymns. The main source of inspiration was the poem Lift Every Voice and Sing by James Weldon Johnson, who was a friend of Savage's. And it's a song which is also often called the Black National Anthem because it's known for being a strong voice calling for the liberation of African-American people. The last line of the song is, "Let us march on till victory is won." And the Harp is also a piece about equality and how black voices are worthy of being heard. They are being physically lifted up by the hand of God. Similar to Savage's other works, the sculpture had been cast in plaster and then painted to resemble basalt. Basalt, that's how you say it. It was apparently one of the most popular works in the fair, seen by over 5 million people. But when the show closed, no one was interested in helping Savage keep the work or having it cast in bronze, so the sculpture was destroyed. And sadly, it also symbolised a crushing end to her career as well. On returning to Harlem, she found her position at the Community Arts Centre had been given to someone else. So unfortunately, she had a few more shows, but then died very sadly in the early 1960s from cancer. Savage was born on the 29th of February on a leap year. She once said, "I was a leap year baby and it seems to me that I've been leaping ever since." And what an amazing woman Augusta Savage was. She devoted her life to teaching other black artists how to sculpt, draw and paint. And Savage's legacy has lived on through the work of her students, even though she's still relatively unknown. Her students included Jacob Lawrence, Charles Alston and Gwendolyn Knight. Thank you very much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Unfortunately, not much of Savage's art exists today, so I've not really been able to include that much in this video. And lots of it was destroyed by Savage herself, but a lot of it just was made out of fragile materials like the plaster that I was talking about, so it's just not survived. And it's a real shame because she overcame so much poverty and racism, and she also had 3 husbands, which I didn't mention, and she had a daughter when she was just 16, so she really was quite an incredible woman who defied the odds. So please comment down below which women artists you'd like me to cover next. I hope you have a great day wherever you are. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!